And we are back. Welcome again to the Programmers Week and the second day of technical talks that you can join us in My Connector for. I'm Ioana Chiorean, your host for today's talk on quality engineering and quality assurance, and we are on with the next session. Buckle up, grab a cup of coffee or a jar of water, whatever you prefer, and we are on to the next talk, which is a bit of a discussion. I think there are some lessons learned from our speaker and also his manifesto for better working in IT. I know that he mentioned that the talk is addressed to all parts involved in the IT process, in business process of software engineering. So without further ado, I do invite Adrian to take over, and I'm very delighted to have one of my colleagues from the delivery project at our work sharing the insights today with us. Adrian, how are you?
Hello, thank you very well. I'm honored to be here with you
Great.
guys.
Let's roll it then.
Thank you. I will admit that I do have a bit of emotions. I did not expect this actually to happen. Let me find the share screen. And I think we're sharing. Okay, so first of all, let's get through the presentation part. And I'm going to speak briefly about myself. So I'm a QA engineer, currently working on Mozilla Firefox, basically innovating the internet. If you're not using the browser, you should probably use it. And I'm not going to go into more details. It's my second term of service with Softvision Cognizant. I worked previously before with then about 9 or 10 years of break. During that break, I did mostly QA, but I also dipped my toes into a bit of project management and product management. They kind of went hand in hand. And then very briefly and unsuccessfully, I would say, into marketing and sales, but just take it with a grain of salt in the sense that I didn't actually do marketing and sales, but mostly have been involved as a technical, from a technical expertise point of view. And that being said, then we should probably look a bit of onto our agenda for today. Like Ioana previously mentioned, we're going to talk a bit about non-QA related. Actually, they're going to be a bit of QA related since most of my expertise is QA related, but it's more like an open discussion about several areas of software development and IT in general, with a bit of cherry picking of some things I consider very important and some things that are not necessarily properly addressed, but not enough addressed. So we're going to have in the order on your screen, IT, the industry spoiled child, which we're going to go a bit onto a history, a bit of on the history lane on the IT, not necessarily the incipient phase, most like the last 20 or so years and how it actually evolved. And I won't be going really deep into each of these areas. So just be advised that I'm not going to be particularly thorough with any of the areas, but just creating a bit of context so it makes sense, the point I'm trying to make. Then we're going to look a bit of at the comparison between Waterfall and Agile. And mostly here, we're again not going to go very deep, just a bit of context, then a bit of into the communication area, not necessarily in the area of types of communication, but more like oversimplifying communication and the basics from which we should start to actually build effective communication, for example. Then we're going to look a bit of soft skills, which I consider to be rather hard, and not in the sense that are hard skills, but rather hard to accomplish or to calculate or assess. Then we're going to discuss a bit about burnout, and then a bit of scientific method in software, which I believe it's rather important. So this would be the overall agenda. Let's go into the first part, the industry spoiled child. I'm gonna stay a bit on this upset princess picture because I think it's important. You probably have had the experience with non-IT people, which often use the phrase "UIT guys," which basically reflects a lack of understanding on what IT actually is, and furthermore, what development actually is, and all the processes related to actually developing software and delivering to the end client or customers. Okay, so the trip down the history lane, let's see a bit an internet usage in the world and how that evolved in the, like I said, let's say a bit of beginning, because I'm not necessarily interested about the latest evolution, but how it evolved to basically near nobody using the internet due to the infrastructure not being there and hardware being hard to basically buy. So somehow it evolved, you could say internet evolved with the hardware and infrastructure, the global infrastructure. So this was basically incipient until near 2000, the year 2000, which was particularly important for many reasons, but two of the reasons that I want to point here are the dot-com bubble burst, which was basically a stock market bubble crash, excessive speculation on dot-com companies, then it crashed. If I remember correctly, Amazon and Qualcomm were almost lost all their capital. They almost went under, and they recovered afterwards. Also, the year 2000 was again important, actually not 2000, but 2001, because the Agile Manifesto has been coined there. It also holds another bit of signification, because after the dot-com bubble burst, the investment that was being done before the year 2000 into infrastructure development and experts in the IT domain and ITC domain actually slowed down, because people are like, okay, we don't really understand this field, we don't really understand what's the benefit, and we already have experience of it not being a good investment place. So we could say that it actually slowed down, and then after that it naturally popped out again to the surface, and the trust into development started to gain again traction. We actually can see here a bit of curve into how IT specialists were being employed during another period of time, so not the period we are previously talking, the 2000 and a bit area. And going back, so basically what we had here and what is important is that between 2000 and 2005, the Agile Manifesto actually started to be implemented. So basically, the methodology started to appear about how Agile would actually change IT and, in the end, the world itself. So we could say this period of time was rather important, and across the next few years, the internet usage grew. Currently, and we will see in the next slide what it was in July 2021. And basically, I had an idea about an educated guess about how these numbers would look, but looking at them, I'm like, wow, really, we're like 70% of the population using mobile and 60% using internet. So basically, this is a lot of people which are benefiting in one way or another from software products. And I'm going to go back a bit about this. So the time for this and the time scale for this are a bit different, but I just wanted to quickly show that the need for IT specialist and ICT specialist is off the roof, and this is just until 2020. So basically, this during the last period, I think it exploded even more during this COVID era that we're living today. So we could say the IT is ever growing. The digitalization is the new thing that everybody wants. And basically, we're going to go into a bit of summary of what I think happened during this period that we just discussed about. So pen and paper becomes obsolete. I'm talking here more about the procedures and how things are done inside and outside companies and communication and so on and so forth. Then in addition to that, classical management system become inefficient. Basically, I'm talking about Waterfall here, and we're going to go back into the Waterfall area in a second. Like I said, digitalization becomes do or die, and this is the reality. A lot of companies have been caught red-handed with the infrastructure and basically the mentality of digitalization not being not even started or not even taken in consideration, and they struggled, if not even worse. Then, like I said, the overall, and I showed earlier, the overall need for IT experts has transitioned during the last 10 years from actually being a commodity to a necessity. And here I'm not necessarily talking just about the IT companies, I'm talking about everyone in general. Of course, being agile is the new thing. Everybody wants to be agile, and agility is something that you definitely want your company to have. Then agility permeates across industries. Everybody implements in some way or another agility. And of course, COVID age engages hyperdrive or on everything that we discussed above. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide, which is going to be, we're going to go a bit back into the timelines that we talked. And before that, I'm going to stop a second and go into this magnificent time lapse. These are about 30 years difference. So this is Dubai in like 30 years ago in the left. And I think that was 2020 in the right. So I think this is a funny picture to have, and I put it for several reasons. So before the Agile being the new standard for development, we will go a bit back down the memory lane, and even if the Agile Manifesto was coined in 2001, maybe around 2005, there were around like 10 or 50% of the IT companies which have tried it, not necessarily adhered to the agile mentality. So I would say realistically, only in the past few years, being agile and having agility have become things that are highly valued and things that were pointing towards. So before that, what actually happened? Well, basically, most of the development was in one or another waterfall model. I'm not going to go into the different variation of waterfall or that existed exceptions before as well. But what I actually want to go into is really understanding what waterfall meant. So waterfall meant that we have initial documentation at the end of the development results a product, and obviously this picture would show how the project would start and how the project would end. This is equally true for agile methodology as well. So you're gonna get into the same endpoint. The difference between them was that actually doing waterfall was, like previously touched, received by clients which were not usually technical. So that generated a lot of issues and stress, and I think it's fair to say that waterfall approach for scaling was not great, and it often resulted into stress, into unwanted pressure, into deadline missed, and let's not talk about quality, because QA in waterfall was reactive and not proactive, being involved at a later stage in the cycle. So you would be often be put in a position to decide if you're gonna release the product with known issues or delay an unforeseen amount of time. And changes again were bad and tough to apply. So I cherry-picked a few items, and I'm going to discuss about 3 of them, but let's go a bit comparing them. So waterfall would be sequential approach. We'll start from a point with a definite plan, and then deliver a product at the end of a long ride. On the other side, obviously, agile is incremental approach. Like I already mentioned, waterfall was rather rigid, and it would be rather hard to apply change orders or general changes to it without shifting or cutting down stuff, which was hard to do usually. Then agile, of course, is high flexibility. It has high flexibility. Then about waterfall, scope is fixed at initial phases. Agile scope is expected to change and default, and we all know this. But I'm just gonna go until I get the last 3. So testing is done in the predetermined sequence, and then in agile we have testing which goes in parallel with development. Okay. Then the last 3, limited coordination for waterfall and high coordination for agile, limited synchronization and high synchronization, and then documentation which waterfall required to be completed before the start, and in agile documentation is done during the entire project. I'm not going to go at this point into the agile part. I'm going to go into waterfall because I think it's rather important to have a comparison point between where we are today and where we were in the past. So when we're talking waterfall, we're talking clients and eventually customers, which would not have a realistic idea of what they're gonna receive. That also was additioned by the fact that at the time Waterfall was in its peak, the management and the Waterfall model was what I call classical ones. And what I mean by that is, for example, you were an accomplished 30 years manager in, I don't know, automotive industry. So you would have very good management skills, but those were poorly applied when you were talking about software and how it would morph and change to meet your expectations. So oftentimes the management would push a plan and an agenda for the development side, and I'm including here company or inside department, which would be unrealistic to achieve. And the funniest story I think I have here about a major misunderstanding of goals and outputs would be, so in this waterfall period, there was a rather big company which was producing, so it was a production company which also had a line and contracts with other big companies to deliver a rather complicated products, let's call them, not to get into too many details. And they decided at some point that they need a front end for their business. So they decided, okay, we need a website. And after the initial discussions about how we're going to achieve that were done, according to the Waterfall methodology, we went ahead and did the documentation, tried to understand the business, so on and so forth. Result of the documentation, after that, price offer, which was required to be really broken down into manageable pieces. So it was followed by back and forth of negotiation about cost and resourcing, and so on and so forth. At a certain point, we got past the IT manager, which was driving the entire endeavor, let's say, and we got to the financial manager. And it took like, I don't know, I don't remember exactly 1 week or 2 weeks, and we got back the offer adjusted a bit. And what is funny, and I think reflects that period very well, it was that as requested, the offer was broken down into, let's say, about 7 or 8 pages of items with man hours and cost to them, out of which the last 2 or 3 pages were like, I don't know, infrastructure, deployment, management hours. And the funny part was that the offer that came back had about 60% of the items cut down and removed. And those items were the actual development and actual work that needed to be done. But the management and the additive or the support section of the document was left untouched. So basically you would go from, let's say, 10 hours of development and 1 hour of management and deployment, and you would get to 2 hours of development and the same hour of the rest of additive tasks. So I think this reflects basically the level of understanding that the Waterfall had at that time. And not necessarily that Waterfall didn't work or doesn't work, because Waterfall has been used and is being used continuously by different areas of the industry. So for example, construction uses Waterfall, and without it, it's not really a place where you want to go, right? So we have areas in which Waterfall actually works and continues to work. Now, why do I say that the IT is a spoiled child? So basically, the IT felt the need, and I think it was a normal change to migrate to the agile methodology and basically to incorporate these tenants, let's call them, and reflect that mentality to different part of the industry. So I'm gonna move on to the next slide, and we're gonna actually connect the communication with the rest of the context, and especially a bit with the title, which I actually failed to explain. So I'm trying to decide if we should go into communication, and let's discuss the title at the end. Maybe it's gonna make a bit more sense. Okay, so let's go into the communication. So we have a lot of how should I call it, pressure put on communication. We're trying to be more effective, more efficient. We're trying to assess different rules and to add value to the communication, to make it brief, to make it more concise, or more clear. And I think that's fine and well, and I definitely don't disagree with that. However, I often find, and this is not necessarily only from my personal experience, but I shall point that as well, so it's also in my personal experience, that somehow we're getting a bit tangled into the labels and terminology, and we forget the basics of communications. So I call this the 3W rule. I didn't want to coin a thing, but I didn't know a better way to actually elaborate on this without getting into the discussion about which part is efficient, which part is effective, and pluses and minuses and things to improve one or another. So I don't want to go into the effective or efficient communication, and not really in the communication either. So what I want, it's in a sense a technical communication. So basically what we use in our professional environment. And when I say professional environment, it's somehow I'm somehow referring to the part that helps you or helps your team or the company to do its thing efficiently. You can replace thing with anything that you want. So I call this the rule of 3W, like I said. So it's what, why, and whom. So I think in anything that you want to do, you need to account for these three things. And this is like the initial step. So to break it down really nice and simple, these three areas are the things you want to consider in everything that you want to communicate to somebody, or in a sense whenever you want to attempt to communicate, you need to consider these three areas. So let's go a bit into those three, but I'm gonna split them into the interpersonal communication, and I'm more referring to like video calls or face-to-face meetup, and then the written part. Right. So let's start with the written part. So for the written part, of course, we're in an age where pen and paper doesn't really exist. So you're gonna write mails, and those mails need to be structured according to whom. So you need to account who is the recipient of that information. So you need to account for the level of knowledge that you need to transmit, or more better put to how deep or how concise do you need to be in that particular case. And this will shape the structure of your communication, in this case, the email, from the get-go. So depending on whom you are transmitting, or you want to transmit that information, the initial structure should be clear. And I'm gonna go in a second into examples, but I'm trying to give a general, not necessarily a general rule, but a practice, and I'm not going to call it a best practice, but a practice that you should do. So I would start usually with whom. Whom do I want to communicate that particular information? Then the next is what. So the what would be what that information is. And between whom and what, that email maybe will cease to have its functionality, in the sense that if the whom and the what will prove self-explanatory, in a sense that once you start identifying these two areas, and you actually gonna get to write and to put your thoughts down into the content, you might realize oftentimes that maybe it's not necessary that particular communication. But let's give it a go, and let's say you figure out the whom and the what. Then it's equally important the why. Why do you want to send that communication? It's oftentimes you want an information, or you need to send an information. And of course, this goes into very big details once you go into the types and the best practices of writing document, and more particularly technical documents. So any of those best practices you can apply to writing down emails. And I'm again not gonna go into much details about what you should put into the email and how you should actually formulate the phrases and what language to use or not to use. Instead, what I'm gonna go into are two things that I think they are important. First would be that I guess you could argue that to be really detailed, it's applicable to some cases, and to be really brief and concise applies to other. But there are cases in which you need to be detailed when you should be brief. So how do you actually tackle this problem? They are a bit contradictory, and oftentimes you're going to just pick one and go with it, and then follow up with the next email, and follow up from that further on. But what I usually like to do is write the original email with the amount of detail I'm satisfied with, iterate a few times through it, because I don't usually get it right from the first time. Well, that's basically a big problem of not being a native English speaker. But once I am satisfied with the level of details, I add another section above that in which I summarize the entire mail. And summarize not necessarily that in the proper sense of the summarize, but in the sense of the why. So I'm putting the why into the email as well. And usually the why, like we said, you want something. So if you want something, state something. So I want a decision and blah, 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 the entire rest of the text. Or I need help with that and the rest of the details. So this helps a lot because usually when you receive a wall of text in any form, you're like, do I really need to do this? So that's one thing, and the other thing is just split it into parts. So send first the request and then send the details afterwards. But that's usually not efficient, really. Okay, then another thing also related to written part, but is more like on the instant messaging part. I'm on the side that instant messaging means instant. So usually I'm somehow reluctant to have long discussions on any instant messaging application that you might use, being it web or application. And the reason for that is that usually it's a lot of confusion being driven through it. In the sense that if it's, let's put it this way, if it takes more than 20 back and forwards, you should go to a live discussion and figure that out in a few minutes rather than the spend time on instant messaging. So I guess the point I'm trying to make instant messaging with accents put on instant. So usually do try to get stuff out of chats which are usable as fast as possible. So I think that would be the point for the written part. Now to get into the live ones, and I'm going to include into live ones the face-to-face as well. I do believe that, again, you should have a clear idea about these three areas. So the whom, it's going to be like pretty obvious because you're going to be in an environment in which you know the whom. But the whom, there might be cases in which you don't know all the pieces that helps you understand, for example, emotions, or in case you're in live, or you're in a situation in which you cannot really count off the whom. So in this case, I guess it's pretty important to take in account that you need to be iterative. So you will start at the baseline of understanding, and then navigate from that until you reach a point of common sense. And like I said, we're going to go to the common sense at the end, but I need to look at the time. Okay, I'm getting really tight on the time. Okay, so okay, let's stop with the communication part here, I guess. The main point of the communication part that I want to bring is that the things that we're focusing in our professional communication are a bit to elaborate, and we're sometimes missing the basic parts, and sometimes, and there are cases in which it's inevitable to happen, we forget one of these three important, let's call them rules, and we forget to whom we're sending the respective communication, or why are we even discussing that. And we end up discussing like half an hour, and then what did we accomplish? Well, nothing. Did we actually wanted to accomplish anything with this? Not really. So it ends up being sometimes frustrating to spend time on something that we're not clear on why we're doing. Okay, since we're going to be short on time, we're going to go a bit of a go, like really short on the soft skills, which I prepared a very nice effect here. And I do believe we're going with the soft skills really in a direction that I don't particularly agree with. And now to elaborate on this and take it please with a bit of grain of salt, I don't think the soft skills are not important. On the contrary, I consider they are very important. However, we're getting stuck into the terminology. We're getting stuck into the theoretical meaning of them, and in the end, it's rather hard to assess someone's level of a particular soft skill, and even more, it's rather uncomfortable to either suggest or just get better at a particular soft skill. And even more, what I think is the problem, actually not necessarily the problem, but one aspect which is really important, is that we could actually extend the soft skills into the area of the team. So you could start from an idea that the team, I mean, individuals in the team have a certain level, assuming that you could measure that and be efficient at measuring that. Let's assume you could establish what the level of a soft skill would be in a team, in individuals from the team. And then you could say, okay, so the team has this particular level of soft skill, and then go on the organizational level. And I think in a certain cases is a bit confusing for people to be pointed towards soft skills generally. So for example, let's say, okay, we need you to be friendly. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Should I be friendly in the team, in general? Where should I be friendly? I mean, it's really hard to establish a line, and then that line to raise it, or getting to where you want it to be. And it's not like the soft skills just appeared right now. I think the labels were coined and came into focus in the last few years, actually more than few years. But I think we always had soft skills. However, we didn't put as much importance on them, and I think we're going in a place where we're already putting too much importance on actually coining and defining the direction that you should go with one or another. And to be honest, if you're going to go even in the same company into different teams and assess what the team understanding is about a soft skill or another, they're going to be widely different. And then if you go even farther organizational level, and you're going to go, okay, what is the direction we want to go with this? And it's going to be a list of things with proper description and details, and you're going to be like, okay, so let's get it. Let's get it to the next one, because like I said, the time is really short. I wanted to talk a bit more about soft skills and how the teams actually self-regulate themselves, and when the when I think that actually soft skills or the lack of can be disruptive, but due to the time and due to the fact that I really want to talk a bit about prevention, about burnout and prevention, at least of a few points of them. I think this is one of the main things I want to talk about, and I think it's really, really important. And let's really go through this really fast. So burnout. So what burnout is, I put here the definition, the psychological definition, and I'm not actually going to go into the definition that it's currently used for software development. It's a bit more, but I think it's good to start from this. And so, okay, the time. So let's go into the prevention part, and I'm gonna leave the first and the last bullet at the end, and hopefully I can take 2 minutes for them. So for the prevention, I think that in the COVID era, we're mostly working from home. This means we need to be even more disciplined and trying to disjoint personal and professional life better. I admit I'm not doing this very well, and on the long run is not good not to be able to do so. I think this is a point where I should work on it, and everybody should be at least aware that this is probably a must. Then the third point would be understanding decisions. This was again a point that I wanted to really get into it, but I can't really right now due to the time. Then navigate your organization. I guess this is related to understanding decisions, and the navigation of any organization. It's rather simple, since in my view at least, since we're not really bound by a fixed and rigid structure like probably you would have in the past. So any organization now is rather flexible, so you can access any point of the organization. I doubt there would be a lack of response or transparency in most of the nowadays organization, or at least the organizations that pretend to be or to have agility. So the decision so understanding decision, I think, is a very important point into preventing burnout. And the reason for this is that in often cases there are decisions which are not nice. You don't agree with them. They are like make no sense. So you need to count here that no matter the level you're at, you are lacking a bit of an overview. So let's say you have 10 levels in your organization. So you're at level 3. If you get a decision, or if you're forced to make a decision, that decision may not make sense for you. But if you would view that decision for the 5th or the 6th point, that would make perfect sense. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes some decisions which are, I'm not going to say So let's say sometimes some decisions that do not really make sense for you, maybe they don't make sense because you need to change the vantage point that you're looking at that decision. And this causes especially a bit of stress, since we tend as human beings to get ownership on things. So it's my bug, it's my code, it's my part of the application, it's my UX, it's so on and so forth. So when a decision like we're going to cut this project down comes, you're going to be like, but I did everything right. So all the overtime and all the work that I put and passion that I put into this, and whatever adjective you might feel that you should use, then that went to nothing. But the reasoning for that, once you understand it, it's gonna make it easy to let go and move to the next one. Okay, 2 minutes left. Okay, responsibility and derogation. This is another important point that maybe is not necessarily a prevention, but it's more on the best practices area. In the waterfall age, you would have, and maybe a bit over that period, you would have like rather clear responsibilities. So you had to do that. So you could do a list of things that you might be or should be responsible of. In the agile age, this I think this fundamentally changed. So what I'm trying to say here is that you should take as much responsibility as possible, because responsibility actually empowers you to get that visibility or vantage point that I discussed over the last 2 points. Then responsibility obviously comes hand in hand with derogation. So you should know when you should derogate that responsibility, either left or right, up and down, and you can pick the the diagonal or the vertical or the whatever sense you would feel that you should have. And we're not going to go through the last one, because I have the part of the title that is really dear to me and probably should have been the main focus of the presentation, and that would be the common sense. So it's really, really hard to define common sense. I mean, if you'd go into it, you'd probably, it wouldn't be correct to even say it's a skill set. So it's more like a sense. So the common sense, I think it's somehow related to a time frame, to a knowledge base, and more importantly, how you apply those things. And most often, I think common sense comes about things that you can only rationalize afterwards. It's a bit ambiguous, but what I'm trying to say, it's that at least to my understanding in the development world or the IT world, or what you might say, the common sense, it's that extra thing that you have when discussing something. And it's often the case, and I'm going to finish with this, it's often the case that you might have a discussion starting from different positions, and then you would reach a common sense. So that implies not only that you reach a mutual understanding, or at least some of the points are common. That means that you are able to shift your position and to reach a new level of common sense. I'm really sorry that I couldn't get into details into this. It's my bad, I left it for the end.
No worries, Adrian. I mean, it was a really interesting talk covering so many things, and that's the opportunity here. You know, with any situation, there is an opportunity. We'll continue this with a new tech talk. either next time when we have Programmers Week or other open calls, or even internally. So I'm just waiting for a wink from your side, and we'll continue the discussion. I really like that you put burnout. It's a really important topic after so many work from home months. And I did also wait for you to see if you're tackling who is responsible, but not the responsibility you mentioned about giving a solution to it, employer, employees, clients, be more considerate. It's a long talk, so definitely would love to hear more on it. Thanks so much.
Sure, thanks as well.